Morning my wife told me she wanted a divorce, I was halfway through a piece of toast. She sat down across from me at the kitchen island, folder in hand, and slid it toward me like she was handing me a quarterly report. No tears, no trembling lip, just that careful, rehearsed expression she used when she was about to deliver bad news to her sister or fire someone from the dental practice. I knew that face. I'd watched her practice variations of it in the bathroom mirror for 23 years. I took another bite of toast, chewed, swallowed, wiped my mouth with a napkin she folded into a triangle the night before. "Okay," I said. She blinked. "Okay, yeah, okay." I opened the folder. The papers were prepared by Thornton and Ray's, that big firm downtown with the marble lobby and the partners who all drove the same color. Range Rover. Expensive. She'd gone for expensive. I flipped to the signature page first because I already knew what every other page said. I'd seen this exact document 4 months ago in PDF form on her laptop when she left it open in the den. I uncapped the pin she'd thoughtfully provided. A Mont Blanc? A nice touch. I signed my name and dated it, then slid the folder back across the granite. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You're not even going to read it?" "I trust you," I said. That broke something in her face. Just for a second. A crack in the porcelain. Then she pulled herself back together and stood up, smoothing her blouse like she was about to address the PTA. "I'll have my lawyer call yours," she said. "Sure thing." She walked out of the kitchen, and I went back to my toast. I'd been waiting for that morning for almost a year, and the strange part was, I wasn't even angry anymore. I'd burned through all that. What I felt, sitting there in the kitchen we've remodeled together in 2017, was something closer to relief. Like setting down a suitcase I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten how heavy it was. My name is Hollis. I'm 54 years old, and I'd been married to my wife, Tessa, for 23 years. We had no kids together. She'd never wanted them, and by the time we both realized I did, I was too in love with her to make it a deal breaker. I have a son from my first marriage. He's 28 now, lives in Denver, works in renewables. We talk every Sunday. Tessa never warmed to him the way I hoped she would, but she was civil. That was always Tessa's word. Civil. I should back up. A year ago, almost exactly, I came home from a fishing trip a day early because the weather turned. 3 of us had driven up to a lake in northern Minnesota, my buddy Reggie's place, and the storm rolled in Friday afternoon. Reggie said we might as well head home, so I drove the 6 hours back, walked into my own house at about 11 at night, and the first thing I noticed was that the house smelled like cigarettes. Tessa doesn't smoke. Tessa has never smoked. Tessa once made a scene at a restaurant in Charleston because a man 2 tables over lit a cigar on the patio. I stood in the foyer with my duffel bag still on my shoulder, and I listened. The house was quiet. The lights were off. Her car was in the garage. I called out, "Tess," and got nothing. I went upstairs. Our bedroom door was closed, which was unusual. She always left it open. I opened it, and the bed was made. Hospital corners. Pillows arranged. She wasn't there. I checked the guest room. Empty. The office. Empty. The office. Empty. The office. Empty. I went back downstairs, into the kitchen, and there was a half-empty bottle of wine on the counter with 2 glasses next to it. One had lipstick, the other didn't. The dishwasher was running. She'd cleaned up, but she'd forgotten the bottle. I stood there for a long time, just looking at those 2 glasses. Then I heard the side door open, the one that leads from the driveway into the mudroom, and Tessa walked in wearing a sweatshirt that wasn't hers. It was too big. Men's. Gray with a faded logo I didn't recognize. Her hair was wet. Her face went white when she saw me. "You're home," she said. "I'm home." She recovered fast. That was Tessa. She always recovered fast. She told me she'd gone over to her friend Marlene's because Marlene's pipes had burst, and she'd helped clean up and gotten soaked and borrowed Marlene's husband's sweatshirt for the walk to the car. The story came out smooth as cream. She'd had time to think about it on the walk from wherever she'd been parked back to her house. I said, "Okay." I always say okay. That night I lay next to her in our bed, and I listened to her breathing, and I thought about the 2 wine glasses, and the sweatshirt, and the cigarettes, and I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be in this situation. I didn't want to be the kind of man who screamed and threw things. I'd seen that movie. My father had been that man, and it had broken my mother in slow installments over 20 years. I didn't want to be the kind of man who confronted her and got lied to and pretended to believe it. I'd seen that movie too. That's how Reggie's first marriage ended. What I wanted lying there in the dark, was to know. Not suspect, not assume. No. And then I wanted to be in control of what happened next. So the next morning, I made her coffee the way she liked it, and I kissed her on the forehead, and I went to work, and on my lunch break, I drove to a strip mall in a town 2 over from ours, and I walked into the office of a private investigator named Earl. Earl was about my age, ex-cop, looked like a beat-up baseball glove with a beard. He charged me $2,500 up front and asked me 3 questions. What was her routine? What was her phone situation? And did she ever leave the house at odd hours? I gave him a key to her car and the access code to the garage. He didn't ask why. I think he could see it on my face. It took Earl 3 weeks. The man's name was Bram. He owned a high-end home audio installation business, the kind that wires up mansions with hidden speakers and theater rooms. He was 46, divorced, no kids. He lived in a condo on the river, 22 minutes from our house. I know it was 22 minutes because I drove it myself, twice after Earl gave me the address. Once in the afternoon, once at 11 at night, just to feel what she felt when she drove there. Earl gave me a folder. Photographs. Hotel receipts from a year before Earl even started watching her. Bram, it turned out, had been hired to install a sound system in our living room in the spring of the previous year. I remembered him. Big guy. Loud laugh. Tessa had made small talk with him at the kitchen island while he worked. I'd been in the garage staining a bookshelf. That was where it started, in our own house. While I sanded a piece of pine in the next room. I sat in Earl's office with that folder on my lap, and I didn't cry. I want to say I cried because that's what you're supposed to do, but I didn't. I felt like I'd been hollowed out with a melon baller. There was a kind of quiet inside me that I hadn't felt since my mother died. Earl said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to think." He nodded. He'd seen this before. He didn't push. I drove home and I made dinner. Chicken piccata, her favorite. She came in around 7, kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, told me about a difficult patient at the practice. We ate. We watched a movie. We went to bed. And I lay next to her and I thought, here's the thing nobody tells you about being betrayed. The first thing you feel isn't rage. It's embarrassment. Deep, marrow-level embarrassment. Because you realize you've been a character in a story you didn't know you were in. People knew. Her hairdresser probably knew. Her sister definitely knew. Marlene, the woman she used as her alibi, knew. They'd all been looking at me and thinking, oh, that poor bastard, he has no idea. And I had been walking around feeling like the captain of my own life. Once the embarrassment passes, then comes the rage. But by the time I let myself feel it, I was already 3 weeks into planning. And I made a decision that I want to be very clear about, because it's the decision that everything else hinged on. I decided I would not give her the satisfaction of a fight. She wanted a fight. I knew her well enough to know that. Tessa was a woman who derived energy from conflict. She thrived in it. Her whole career as the office manager of a dental practice was built on managing chaos and being the calm center of it. If I confronted her, she'd cry, she'd apologize, she'd promise to end it, and then she'd find a way to make it my fault that the marriage had broken down. The long hours, the fishing trips, the fact that I'd never been emotional enough, the fact that I'd loved my son from my first marriage. There would be a list. There is always a list. I wasn't going to give her the list. So instead, I called a lawyer. Not Thornton and Ray's, a guy named Pat, who'd handled my mother's estate 10 years earlier. Pat was 68 years old, semi-retired, worked out of a small office above a barbershop. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, Hollis, the first thing we're going to do is figure out what you've got, what she's got, and what's in the middle. What I had, a 401k, I'd been building since I was 26, an inheritance from my mother that I'd kept in a separate account on my lawyer's previous advice. A small consulting business I'd started 6 years ago on the side that I ran out of a leased office, and the deed to the lake cabin my father had left me. What she had, her income from the dental practice, a smaller 401k, and a small inheritance from her aunt. What was in the middle? The house, the cars, the joint checking, the vacation fund. The cabin I'd added her to the deed on 5 years into the marriage because I was sentimental and stupid. Pat told me to start documenting everything. Statements, valuations, receipts. He told me to do it quietly, over months, not weeks. He told me not to move money, not to hide anything, not to do anything that would look bad in court. He said, The best thing you can do right now is be a boring, well-documented husband. Pay your bills on time. Don't make any big purchases. Don't change your behavior. So I didn't. For 10 months, I lived in that house with my wife, and I behaved exactly the way I had behaved for the previous 23 years. I made her coffee. I asked about her day. I kissed her goodnight. I watched movies with her on the couch. I told her she looked nice when she got her hair done. I went on an anniversary trip to Savannah with her in March and held her hand on the riverboat and smiled for the photo. A stranger took a bus in front of a fountain. She kept seeing Brahm. Earl confirmed it every few weeks. I paid him to keep watching, not because I needed more evidence. I had plenty, but because I needed to know she hadn't ended it on her own. As long as she was still seeing him, I was the moral party in my own head. That mattered to me. I don't know why. It just did. I started moving certain things, with Pat's guidance, in legal and documented ways. I transferred the deed of the lake cabin back to a trust in my name only, which I had the right to do because I'd inherited it before the marriage, and the addition of her name had been a beneficiary designation rather than a transfer of ownership. Pat had been right about that 1 year ago. I rolled some funds within my 401k into a new allocation. I did not hide money. I did not move money out of joint accounts. I just made sure that what was mine was clearly, documentably mine. I also did something else, which I'll admit took the longest to make peace with. I found a small house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, on a quiet street in a town about an hour north of where we lived. It had a porch. The previous owner had been an old man who died, and his kids wanted to sell it fast. I bought it in cash from my inheritance account, in my name only, and I told no one. I drove up there on Saturdays when Tessa thought I was at the office. I painted the walls. I bought a used couch from a consignment shop. I picked out a coffee maker. I built, in slow, secret stages, a life I could step into. I want to be honest about something. There were nights, lying next to her, when I thought about telling her I knew, just rolling over and saying it. Tessa, I know about Brahm. I know about the hotel in St. Anthony. I know about the condo on the river. I know everything. I never did. And the reason I never did was something I figured out late one night, sitting on the porch of my secret house with a beer, looking at the stars. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even pride. It was that I had stopped loving her, and I had stopped some time ago, and I didn't want to have an argument with a woman I no longer loved about something that didn't matter anymore. She was going to leave me. I could see it coming. Bram's divorce had been finalized about 8 months into Earl's surveillance, and the trips had gotten longer, and the lies had gotten thinner. She was working herself up to it. She just needed the courage. I waited for her to find it. The morning came in October, a Tuesday. She'd been up earlier than usual, in the bathroom for a long time. I'd made coffee. She came downstairs in her work clothes, holding the folder, and she sat down across from me, and she said, "Hollis, we need to talk." I already knew what was in the folder because I'd seen the email she'd sent her lawyer 4 months earlier when she left her laptop open. She wanted the house, half of my 401k, half of the consulting business, half of the lake cabin, and spousal support for 5 years because, as her email put it, her career had stagnated during the marriage. She'd been preparing for a fight. She'd hired Thornton and Reyes precisely because they were known for being aggressive. She thought I'd push back and she'd hold the line and we'd settle somewhere in the middle and she'd walk out of the marriage with about 60% of what we had together. So when I signed the papers without reading them, what I was actually signing was a document that Pat and I had spent 4 months quietly negotiating with her lawyer's office through a series of letters that she had assumed I'd been reluctantly responding to. She had no idea I'd been the one driving the schedule. She thought I'd been dragging my feet, denying what was happening, going through the motions. The version of the agreement she handed me that morning was the version Pat and I had structured. The house was being sold and split. My 401k was protected because of the timing of certain contributions and the inheritance funds I'd kept separate. The lake cabin was no longer joint property. The consulting business was valued at a fraction of what she'd been told because Pat had hired a specific kind of business appraiser, and there was no spousal support because the agreement we'd structured paid her a lump sum up front in exchange for her waiving future claims. She didn't know any of that. She just saw the folder on the granite countertop and assumed she'd won. When I signed without reading, I wasn't being a doormat. I was confirming a deal I'd already made. I want to talk about what happened after, because that's the part nobody tells you about. I expected to feel triumphant. I'd been planning for almost a year. I'd done everything right. I'd protected myself. I'd kept my dignity. I outmaneuvered a woman who thought she was outmaneuvering me. And when she walked out of that kitchen with the sign folder, I expected to feel something close to victory. Instead, I sat at the island for a long time, and I finished my toast, and I felt nothing. Not nothing exactly. I felt tired. I felt the weight of 23 years come down on me all at once. I thought about the first apartment we lived in together. A one-bedroom above a Greek restaurant with a radiator that banged all night. I thought about the trip to Maine in our second year when we got lost on a back road and ended up at a lobster shack where the owner sat down with us and told us his life story for 2 hours. I thought about the morning we got the call that my mother had died, and how she'd held me on the floor of the kitchen for I don't know how long while I cried. She had been my person. For a long time, she had been my person. And the fact that she had stopped being my person and had become someone who plotted and lied and sat across from me with rehearsed expressions didn't erase the years before. It just made the years before feel like they belonged to two different people who had been replaced by strangers. The house sold in November. We split the proceeds. I drove up to the small house I'd bought in secret, and I moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of books. I didn't take any furniture from the marital home. I didn't want any of it. Let her have the couch. Let her have the dining table. Let her start over with everything that reminded her of me. Bram, as it turned out, had not been planning to leave his own situation for her. I learned this through a series of mutual acquaintances over the following months. Apparently, when Tessa told him she'd finalized her divorce and was free, he panicked. He'd been enjoying the arrangement as it was. A married woman, no commitment, no scrutiny. When she became available, he became unavailable. By Christmas, he had stopped returning her calls. I heard this from Reggie, who heard it from his wife, who heard it from someone at Tessa's hair salon. Information travels in mysterious ways in a small city. I felt a flicker of satisfaction when I heard it, and then I felt ashamed of the satisfaction, and then I let it go. My son came to visit me in the new house at Christmas. He brought his fiancée, a smart, funny woman named Joss, who works for a museum. The 3 of us made a turkey and watched old movies and slept in until 10. On Christmas morning, my son hugged me in the kitchen and said, "I'm glad you got out, Dad." And I said, "Me too, kid." And that was all we said about it. In February, Tessa called me. I almost didn't answer. I let her ring 4 times, and then something in me, curiosity maybe, or that old reflex of 23 years, picked up. She was crying. She wanted to meet. She wanted to talk. I sat on my porch with the phone to my ear, looking at the bare branches of an oak tree across the street, and I said, "I don't think that's a good idea." She said, "Hollis, please." I didn't know how much I'd lose. I said, "I know." I didn't know how much I'd lose. I said, "I know." I said it gently. I wasn't trying to wound her. I wasn't trying to win anything. I just wanted to be honest with her finally after a year of not being honest with each other. I said, "Tessa, you knew what you were doing. You knew for over a year. You made choices." I made choices. We don't have to make this messier than it already is. She cried more. She said things I won't repeat here because they were the kind of things people say when they're trying to claw back a life they've already let go of. I listened. I didn't argue. When she was done, I said, "I hope you find your way." And I hung up. I sat on the porch for a long time after that, and I watched the sun set behind the houses across the street, and I thought about the way she used to laugh in the early years, before either of us knew who we'd become. I thought about how marriages don't usually die in one event. They die in increments. They die in the small accumulations of unsaid things, of dinners eaten in silence, of birthdays half remembered, of moments where one of you reaches and the other one doesn't reach back. By the time Bram showed up in our living room with his speakers and his loud laugh, we had been ending for years. Neither of us had been brave enough to say it. That doesn't excuse what she did. Let me be clear about that. There is no version of the story where what she did was acceptable, and I won't pretend otherwise to seem mature. She betrayed me. She lied to me for over a year. She used my own home as the staging ground for her affair. She planned to take more than her share when she left, and she would have if I hadn't been 3 moves ahead of her. But the fact that she did all of that, and the fact that our marriage had been quietly dying long before any of it, can both be true. The world is big enough for both of those things. I'm still in the small house. I've added a vegetable garden out back, and a swing on the porch where I drink coffee in the mornings. I have a dog now, a rescue mutt named Birch, who has one floppy ear and an opinion about everything. My consulting business is doing better than it has in years, because I have more time and more focus and less weight to carry. My son and his fiancée visit every couple of months, and we cook big meals and play cards and laugh until our faces hurt. I started seeing someone, very recently, a widow, 2 years younger than me, who lives in town and runs a bookstore that I started visiting on Saturdays. Her name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that when she laughs, it's her own laugh, not a laugh borrowed from a script. And when she asks me a question, she actually wants to hear the answer. I had forgotten what that felt like. I want to say one more thing, or whoever's listening, because I think this is the part that's hardest to explain and the part that matters most. When I signed those papers without reading them, I was not being heroic. I was not being clever. I was being free. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes from knowing exactly who you are dealing with, and exactly what you want, and exactly how to get there. Tessa had spent a year of her life thinking she was running a long con on me. She thought I was oblivious. She thought I was weak. She thought the worst day of my life was going to be the day she sat down across from me with that folder. What she didn't understand was that the worst day of my life had already happened, 10 months earlier, in Earl's office, with the photographs in my lap. Everything since then had been me getting better. By the time she handed me the papers, I was the strongest I had been in 23 years. I was ready. I had a house. I had a plan. I had a lawyer who knew what she was going to ask for before she asked for it. I had walked through the fire alone, in secret, while she sat in our kitchen and thought she was the one with all the cards. When I picked up the pen and signed without reading, I wasn't a doormat. I was a man who had already left, who had been leaving, in his mind and his heart, for almost a year. The signature was just a formality. Sometimes, when people hear this story, they ask me if I have any regrets, if I would do it differently, if I wish I had confronted her, or fought for the marriage, or said what I really felt that morning in the kitchen. The answer is no. I don't regret any of it, not because I'm proud of being a man who can plan in cold blood for 10 months. That part of me, the part that could do that, is not the part of me I want to be most days. But I don't regret it because it worked. It gave me my life back, and it gave it to me on my own terms. And there was nobody in the world I had to thank for it but myself. I keep the folder, the original one she handed me that morning, in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet in my new house. Sometimes, on bad nights when I can't sleep, I take it out and I look at my signature on the last page. It looks like the signature of a stranger, a calm, steady stranger with nothing to prove and nothing left to lose. That stranger is who I am now. And I think, finally, I like him. I've thought a lot about that morning. In the kitchen, the toast, the folder, the pen she set down so carefully on the granite. And the older I get, the more I believe that nothing in a life like mine happens by accident. Tessa didn't wake up one day and decide to betray me. She made 1,000 small choices over years. And I made 1,000 small choices too. And the morning she slid that folder across the counter was just the place where all those choices finally met. That's the thing about cause and effect. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. You think you're just having a regular Tuesday, and meanwhile the seeds you planted 3 years ago are blooming in your driveway. I think about Tessa sometimes, and what she lost, and I don't feel triumph. I feel something closer to sadness, because I watched her trade 23 years of her real life for an arrangement with a man who was never going to choose her. She thought she was being bold. She thought she was being times control. What she was actually doing was making a series of decisions that would leave her at 51 years old alone in a rented condo with no Bram, no Hollis, and no version of the future she'd imagined. That wasn't punishment from some higher power. That was just what happens when you build something on a lie. Lies don't hold weight. They collapse under it. What I learned from all of it, and what I'd want anyone going through something like this to hear, is that there are 3 things a man needs when his life starts to come apart. And they're the same 3 things he needs when it's whole. He needs to keep his integrity, because the moment you let yourself become cruel or petty, you start to become the thing you're running from. He needs to keep his mind sharp, because rage makes you stupid, and grief makes you slow, and the world doesn't wait for you to catch up. And he needs to keep his backbone, because the temptation, when you're hurting, is to collapse, to make a scene, to beg, to break something. The strongest thing I ever did was nothing. For 10 months, every day, I did nothing dramatic. I made coffee. I went to work. I planned quietly, in the dark, until I had built a door I could walk through. I'm not a wise man. I want to be clear about that. I made mistakes in my marriage, and some of them probably mattered, but I learned, late and at a cost, that the kind of person you are in the worst moment of your life is the kind of person you'll be for the rest of it. So you choose. You choose to be honest. You choose to be smart. You choose to be smart. You choose to keep standing. And one morning, sooner than you think, you'll wake up in a small house with a porch and a dog and a quiet life, and you'll realize the worst part is behind you and the best part is still coming.